Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet.
This review is brought to you in part by Riders Hobby Shops, where the fun begins. This review covers the rescue of a 1982 Corvette Collector's Edition kit. It's a 1/8 scale kit from Monogram, number 2606. Now, the Chevrolet Corvette C3 was produced from 68 to 82. And this was a collector's edition, a real car, that was made in the final year to commemorate that run. It was a silver beige unit with a large hood stripe, mirrored T-tops, special badging, and exclusive fin aluminum wheels. Now, this was the first Corvette to sell for more than $20,000, and over 6,700 were built. Originally released as Monogram's 78 L82 Corvette kit, it was updated for the 82 Corvette Collector's Edition version. And if you've been in the hobby for a while, you'll know it's rare to find these classic kits for sale. And when you do, they go for upwards of $600. Typically, you'll find them in the corner of a garage sale or a flea market with a big box that's torn, dusty, and faded on the cover. She's been started, broken, and poorly painted. But underneath, she's a gem in the rough. Now, there's about 140 pieces, and this one's molded in metal glow silver, black chrome, and tinted red in clear parts, with rubber tires and screws. Final dimensions of the kit are 23 inches long, 9 inches wide, and 6 inches tall. It's for intermediate to advanced builders, as it's been previously owned. Now, they don't make them like this anymore, so if you find one, be one of the few, the proud. Be a rescuer. So this is what I found when I opened the box, and just as typically, you'll find the same thing. Some of the sub-assemblies are put together. Some of the parts are painted either badly or incorrectly, the wrong colors, or the paint doesn't match. There's going to be issues, but there's usually none that you can't overcome unless parts are missing, in which case that's another issue entirely. So we'd like to show you how to deal with things like damage repair, paint restoration, and part identification ability. As you can see, a lot of the parts are off the trees, so the part numbers are not attached to them any longer. If you find one of these kits, obviously there will be some things that you're going to have to deal with, but if you don't want to do that and you still want to build one of these, this is what the kit would look like if you bought a sealed kit and found one somewhere. They're a little pricey, but they can be had occasionally. One of the other issues that I had were the decals. Quite often they're checked and cracked, and as soon as they hit the water, they'll just explode into little bits and pieces. But for the most part, they looked pretty good, except that they were faded to a different color. The pigment had changed to more or less a bronze, like a chocolate brown or something, and they just wouldn't work on a car that I was building. They wouldn't work on a silver one either, for the most part. So you would either have to reproduce these with an inkjet printer and decal paper, or in my case, I just did not use the decals at all, and I just went for a standard looking vehicle. The first thing that you'll want to do is to get a copy of the instructions, and either use the ones that came with the kit, a regular kit supplied copy, or make photocopies of the instructions, and then inventory the parts. Make sure that all the pieces that you need to build the model are there, or that there are some that you could scratch build, or buy resin replacements for, or go back to the owner and see if he has the part that's missing. In this case, that happened for me. I knew the owner, and he was able to locate a piece that was missing. The dashboard wasn't in the kit box, and he had it in his stash. For some reason, it got misplaced, and maybe that's why he gave the kit away in the first place, but I got it back and was able to use it. I had also noted that the front fascia on the front end of the vehicle was a different shade of red than the rest of the body, and that was probably because it was painted separately, maybe got extra coats on it. And there was also some orange peel on the whole thing. So this model needed a new paint job. Like most of the large-scale car kits that I have seen, the roof has a break in it, or the windshield on a convertible has a break in one of the pillars. Fortunately, they're usually a clean break, and in this case, you can just glue that back with some super glue in position, hold it in place until it sets, and then clean it up nicely. Oftentimes you'll find that the paint is just too thick and hides some of the detail, and there are a number of ways to take care of this. This one will be stripped in what's now called Purple Power. It used to be Castrol Super Clean, but there's also it's called the Purple Lake, by the way, in case you wonder. Easy Off Oven Cleaner, the yellow cap product, along with brake cleaner, is a good way to strip paint. You just have to submerge it into the liquid in a closed container until the paint comes off. Also, for chrome parts that may need to be replated or repainted, you can use Easy Off, or bleach is an easy way to clean those chrome parts. I set about to remove the paint from the pieces that needed it with some lye solution, because it would take about 5 gallons to cover this whole thing all at once, and I found that it didn't work. So I tried some Easy Off, and likewise, no success there. Off the edges maybe a little bit. And so I went to the Purple Power, and I tried that, and I got some, chipping off of the edges, but still, what you'll find is that 30-year-old enamel is difficult to remove. Finally, I tried some of the brake fluid, and it works. Unfortunately, it takes a lot of brake fluid to cover a car body, so it would have cost too much for me to go and buy all that in a large 24 by 10 by 12 inch container to strip the paint. So the next best thing is 800 grit sandpaper, wet or dry, under a faucet with careful sanding, trying not to damage any of the detail, script work and trim, etc. It takes time, but it works. Now that the paint was thinned out and the orange peel was smoothed out, it was time to address some of the damage. And the T-tops were broken in one spot here, and while handling it to fix the T-top, the front fascia and the bumper cracked off. Now this happens because the plastic is very brittle, so you have to be very careful when you're handling the body, and sometimes it just happens. Anyway, line up the parts and then seep some thin super glue into the crevice, and then join the parts together until it sets, and takes about 45 to 60 seconds. Now with the body parts properly sanded and smoothed out, it'll be easier to get an equal paint job by putting some of the pieces together. And I attached the front and rear bumpers into place and added the mirrors to the doors. Now I can prime the body and the parts and prepare them for paint. The hood and the T-tops and the firewall will be left off, but then placed on the body for color coats later. After fixing and smoothing out any imperfections that I saw, I gave it a light coat of lacquer primer. Especially important when you use a metallic paint, you want to tape the body panels all together and spray them all at one time. And in this case, I used an automotive paint. A professional automotive paint. I mixed about 15% silver with some medium blue to get this nice looking shade for my Corvette. As I had mentioned earlier, the color tone had changed to the point where I couldn't use them for this build. I'll only be using the dashboard and console decals here. Now we'll start working on some of the body, exterior assembly, etc. And the chrome in this kit was still in pretty good shape, so I elected to just use those. And once you've assembled these pieces, you can paint the front side lights, turn signal yellow on top and then white on the lower. And trim ring around it is silver, and the side vents are flat black. The two hood hinge supports will be hidden, and then paint the Corvette emblem black, red, and white as needed. You can pick that out with a toothpick or a fine brush. We'll also be adding the tinted windshield and the backlight. We'll start with the hood, insert it in place, and attach the hinge supports as seen in the picture here. The easiest way to work around the body is in one direction, attaching the parts as needed. Now attach the emblem, and then on each side add the vent, the lower trim, the door handle, and the front and rear marker lights. And then once those are cured, do the other side. Install the T-top roof brace, and then install the front and rear glass from the outside using some white or crystal clear, and then install the rear view mirror. Set the body aside now to dry. So gather up the parts to assemble the motor, and still do some work here. The engine block, of course, and tranny were painted initially orange and then a thick coat of blue, and was finally stripped off for the most part in some purple power and scrubbed clean. So I painted the motor block a medium blue and a flat black bell housing and steel transmission, and the remaining parts were already partially assembled and they were painted, but the quality was acceptable, so I left them and used them as is. And then I assembled the motor. Now the intake was completed with the injector jets installed and then painted gold on an aluminum intake with a black distributor cap. The valve covers were added, and then on the intake add the two chrome parts, and all the pulley parts were painted steel and the fan was black. Now assemble the pulleys onto the water pump, and the AC unit back and alternator back go into place, and then the chrome pulley on each unit as well. Now there are three pulley parts that install to the water pump, and then the fan and the fan clutch. So assemble the harmonic balancer, and as you can see here, add your wires to the spark plug holes and distributor. And I would recommend that you use a wire loom for this for a more clean look than just what I've ended up with here. And next you can add the engine shield here you see in the back end covering the distributor and the back side. And the belts are rubber bands. They need to run over by a black Sharpie and installed into place. And then the large belt goes to the harmonic balancer, the back fan pulley, and the alternator. And then the small belt goes on the front fan pulley to the AC unit. Now add the starter and the oil filter into place. You can see the starter is steel with the black solenoid, and the exhaust can go into position now. The exhaust manifolds and the shield, make sure that stays into place vertically so that it doesn't run into the firewall in back. Now locate the parts for the front suspension, and all of the parts are except for the sway bar are semi-gloss black, including the chassis, and the sway bar is a steel color. The springs are assembled and painted flat black with steel springs. Now go ahead and put the lower suspension together according to the instructions. It goes together pretty easily and they all fit nice locating points. But if you need clarification, the instructions for this model are at the end of the review. Now add the sway bar after that's installed onto the chassis. Now that you've got the lower suspension in place with the sway bar lining up in front on the pins on the frame rail, and the lower suspension lining up with the frame cross member, you can flip it over as you see here and add the upper A-arms into place, and the steering box can be located. Now install the motor on its mounts and make sure that you use some good strong glue for that joint. Grab the parts for the radiator and paint the shroud and the radiator flat black and the inlet valve steel. Paint the radiator cap aluminum and assemble the shroud to the radiator and add the inlet. Now install it into place on the chassis. Find the group of parts for the rear suspension, and note that there's only one shock, as this is what you get when you have this situation. We'll just build it with one, although it'd be a simple matter to make another one from pieces of sprue or rod stock. In the grand scheme of things, the missing shock is kind of minor, but you may want to replace it with a scratch-built unit. It's not that hard, especially if you have a little of the rod stock from Evergreen or Plastruct, etc. Now the suspension was painted black, and I did the drive shaft in steel and the stabilizer as well. Now the leaf spring gets added in its flat black, and the shock I did have I went with a red color. You can paint it in any color you want. Now assemble the differential halves. Now you take the drive shaft and insert that into the rear differential, and then into the transmission as you glue the suspension into place. Next, add the stabilizer and the leaf spring in place, and add the brace. Now add the shock to the chassis and the stabilizer. Here are the pieces for the exhaust. The mufflers are flat aluminum and the pipes are steel, and there's also some tips there, and we're going to install that and put it into position. Install the exhaust tube from the manifold to the frame brace, and then note the inside of the brace of the tube is just glued into position. There's no attachment point. Install the long exhaust pipe in place at an angle, and then the end goes into the frame brace opposite the short tube. Now attach the exhaust tips into place. The wheel and tire assemblies are next, and the front set has a spindle, but the rears do not. Now note the difference in the brakes. The front has a flat plate, but the rear has a collar and on the axle attachment in the center. So the white hollowed arrow points to the rears here. That's that collar for the rear brakes. I painted the brakes silver with gold calipers, and on the rim backs, the outer rim area went silver. The assembly of the front rim that goes on the side with the already painted white letters, the pad printed white letters, and then the spindle has a brake inserted, then a wheel back and a retainer, and the unit was installed in the rear for the tire there. And to give the tires a little worn look, I used some 220 grit sandpaper to roll and press the tire tread. Next, we'll paint the tie rod assembly semi-gloss black, and once that's dry, we'll add that to the spindles prior to wheel assembly. Now, take note of the attachment point on the tie rod and the spindle. It locks it into place so that when you get that together, the steering will be movable when it's assembled. So watch that keyhole there and attach the tie rod to both tire assemblies. Another contingency for this kit turned out to be that I didn't have some retainers that go on this assembly. The spindles slide onto a pin on the lower A-arms and into a hole on the upper, and there should be a retainer that goes on the spindle pins, but they were gone in this kit, so I had to glue mine into position. Here is the completed front suspension. You can see it's a nice clean look, and with the proper parts you can make this a posable wheel assembly. The rear tires are assembled a little differently. I installed the rims first as before, but the backs are installed on the axle, and the brake goes into place on the axle, then the wheel backs, and then the retainer. Once that assembly is done, you can add the tires onto the wheel backs to finish the rear assembly. Now we're at a point in the build where we have what's called a rolling chassis. We turn our attention to the interior, and here are the parts for the dash. Now, they had already been painted tan for the most part by the previous owner. Unfortunately, they were not all painted, so I had to repaint them all, and it turned out just as well because now they're all the same color and sheen. And I assembled the steering column and painted the dash column and the wheel tan, and the instrument panels were black and remain that way. So they are fine for detailing with the decals and the console decal as well. And here is the instrument panel detail. Cut the decals from the decal sheet and use some Elmer's glue to attach them from the back side to the panels to let the instruments show through. And then these are installed into the dashboard. I painted some of the dash details like the glove box button and some other items, the steering column, center pad, flat black, and then the instrument panel gets installed from the front. And the dash, of course, had been previously assembled there after the details were painted. And the column gets installed, and the levers are installed after painting the grip parts black. Now attach the wheel spokes to the wheel, and I painted the horn button black, not tan, for a little differentiation. And then the wheel gets attached to the column. Now assemble the front seats and the rears to each other, and then I painted the tub and the seats and the armrest tan like the rest. And I did the door handles in black. As the console and pedals were already black, I left them that way, so cutting down some of the assembly time. Now, the seat backs slide into place into the seat bottoms, and then the pedals are attached to the front wall. The console gets installed in place with the shifter, and the armrests go onto the door panels. And I attach the dash to the into place there, and then the interior is finished. And next, the firewall assembly will be installed, and we're going to paint the wiper motor silver color. The brake booster is already a gold color, and the brake booster body is a steel. Now attach the booster to the firewall and assemble that onto the interior. So protect the body on the hood end on top, and then turn it over, of course, and install the interior. And it goes right into place with no issues. And I used a little strip of tape here in the back to hold it in position until I could get some glue along the edges and install that into place. And now, reminding me that this is a mold design from the late 70s, there are 3 screws that hold the chassis in place, and the first hole is pretty easy to see because it was put right in the middle near the back of the gas tank. And the other 2 screws are inside the fender well, and they get attached to those hood hinge mounts that were installed earlier. And even though the chassis is attached to the body with screws, so there's no error there on the part of the builder, the ride height is a little high, and perhaps the rear wheel location could be adjusted a little bit. If you're making a contest model, you're obviously going to have to address some of those issues, along with some of the small missing pieces that would need to be recreated. And back to the engine bay, the air cleaner assembly is painted flat black, and the hose is a semi-gloss black. And that assembly for the air intake gets assembled and added to the intake, and the hose to the radiator. And then here is the finished engine bay as it's complete. And then in the front we can add our license plate tag, and the front is finished. And here's what's left mostly to finish up the rear. And all that's really left is installing the taillights and the emblem. Now the tags and the gas cap emblem go into place too. And you paint the emblem for the Corvette logo, the colors that we talked about earlier. And then the lights are red only on the outer, and on the inner ones it's red with a clear center. So assemble those with some clear glue and add them to the rear, and you are finished. For the exterior, there are a few final details to be installed. The cross fuel injection emblems, the mirror faces and latches for the T-top panels, and you can scrape the glue or the chrome off of any parts that you want to glue that have chrome plating on them. And then go ahead and place the emblems and the mirrors into position and the latches in place. And finally, here is a photo of how the latches are installed and the T-tops are placed onto the roof. Well, there you have it. Your rescue is complete. She's been saved. And let's face it, subject matter is king. And these large 1/8 scale monogram kits are some of the holy grails of automotive kits. So, if you've got the metal, go ahead, tackle that paint removal, replace those little pieces, look for a resin replacement for the bigger ones, and go ahead and make your model shine like new. And as you can see, it's a real head turner. You put this on your shelf and, well, there's no room for anything else, so it'll be quite noticeable. But in and of itself, it's a beauty. And if you have the time and the attention to do something like this, you could also add extra detailing to it and refine some of the fit, etc. It'll be quite impressive when you're done. So there you have it. If you can find one, get it and fix her up. Well, we hope you like this premium model kit rescue and build, and so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can do that by clicking on the icon in the lower right of any of our reviews, and you can find us on Facebook or our website, rightonreplicas.com. Thanks! This review is brought to you in part by Ryder's Hobby Shops, where the fun begins. Stop in to one of Ryder's 2 convenient Michigan locations where you'll find a full range of the latest hobby products, supplies, parts, tools, and paint. You'll find aisles and aisles of scale model kits, RC models, model rockets, Warhammer gaming, and railroading products. Stop in at Ryder's today and tell them Doug sent you.